Genesis chapter 3 contains one of the more comically tragic attempts by the human race to make themselves right before God that we find anywhere in the Bible. And Genesis chapter 3 is when sin first comes into the world. And when the first man and woman enter into sin, when they disobey God and they eat the forbidden fruit, the first thing they do is they look at themselves and realize that they're naked, and they try to cover up their shame. So they go and they find some fig leaves, which are huge leaves, and they sew them together to try to cover up themselves. And they think that by putting on those fig leaves that they're just as good as they were before. But then God comes, and they look at their leaves that they've tried to hide their sin with, and they end up jumping into bushes and hiding because they know that those fig leaves, they can't cover what's wrong with them. Romans chapter 2, beginning with verse 17, addresses another type of fig leaf that the human race has been trying to use ever since, and that is religion. In Romans chapters 1, 2, and in the first half of chapter 3, Paul addresses the bad news that we talked about yesterday, the bad news of the lostness of the human race, the bad news of the fact that we're all sinners. And so in Romans chapter 2, beginning with verse 17, Paul addresses those who are religious, and he says, "You who call yourselves Jews are relying on God's law, and you boast about your special relationship with Him. You know what He wants. You know what is right because you've been taught by His law. You're convinced that you're a guide for the blind and a light for people who are lost in darkness. You think you can instruct the ignorant and teach children the ways of God. If you're certain that God's law gives you complete knowledge and truth." Now here he's speaking to the Jewish people of the first century. But these same verses apply to any religious group that we think, yeah, everybody else, they're bad. But we have God's truth. And that's, we have all these rules. We have all these things that we do. And that's what sets us apart. Our religion covers up our sin. But verse 21 says, "Well then, if you teach others, why don't you teach yourself? You tell others not to steal, but do you steal? You say it's wrong to commit adultery, but do you commit adultery? You condemn idolatry, but do you use items stolen from pagan temples? You're so proud of knowing the law, but you dishonor God by breaking it. No wonder the scriptures say, the Gentiles blaspheme the name of God because of you." You see, religion, it doesn't change what's wrong with us. It's just fig leaves over our nakedness. It's just fig leaves over our sin. Because we think, okay, I know something is wrong, but what I'll do is I'll go to church every Sunday. That'll be all right. I'll help little old ladies across the street. That'll be all right. There's a hurricane. I'm going to give to hurricane relief. That makes me feel better about myself. And so many things that the human race, that we do, they're designed to make us feel better about ourselves, and yet they don't address the main problem. And the main problem is the problem of the heart. As Jeremiah said, the heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who can know how really bad it is? And that's what Paul goes to at the very end of this passage, where he goes right to the heart, where he says, "For you are not a true Jew just because you were born of Jewish parents or because you have gone through the ceremony of circumcision." We could turn this around and also say, you're not right with God because you grew up in church or you were baptized as a baby or because you've gone through all the ceremonies and confirmation and everything else that religious people do. It says, no, a true Jew is one whose heart is right with God. And true circumcision is not merely obeying the letter of the law, rather it is a change of heart produced by the Spirit. See, religion can't make us right with God. Religion can't turn our heart toward God. Only the Spirit of God can do that. And until we give up all of these false attempts and all of our self-efforts to justify ourselves before God, we'll never embrace the good news. And the good news is what we cannot do, God's already done.